by a great panel to discuss one of the, arguably three or so most important questions that we believe the EU is facing these days, namely the question of resilience. So how can we increase the EU resilience? So, I think it has actually been fairly resilient in the pandemic, in this last shock, but we've had our difficulties. We can do much better. And so the focus here is on, if you like, press-proofing the EU with respect to external shocks of any kind. So you can think of them as political shocks, security shocks of the type that we have unfortunately experienced in the last year, but also trade-related shocks, even disease. Now the twist, if you like, of this panel is that we are going to cast the net wider in terms of looking for solutions than just looking at external instruments. So trade policy clearly is one important part of this, but it's not the only instrument. And so, we want to very explicitly also look at internal, domestic EU instruments. So our internal flexibility to react to shocks, our internal mechanisms to share burdens, and of course the single market as a way of allowing us to adjust flexibly and internally. So I'm joined by a great panel, very briefly from my left, your right, to my right, we have Piotr Arak, who is the director and co-founder of the Polish Economic Institute, and he is a macroeconomist who's also worked on sustainable development issues. Then to his right, we have André Shapir, who is a senior fellow at Google and not co-founder of Google, certainly one of the founding senior fellows, working mostly on trade policy and EU governance issues. We have Krzysztof Kaczynski, who is counselor in the Ministry of Economic Development, and previously has had a very distinguished career in Poland's public service, which importantly included a stint as Poland's permanent representative to the WTO and broadly involvement with government. So the rules are that we will give each of the panelists about 5 to 8 minutes to give an opening view. I will then ask a few questions. We will have a round of discussion within the panel, and then we will open up the discussion to both the physical floor here and the virtual floor via Slido. So this is probably where I should be announcing what the Slido handle is, but I need to look for that. So in the meantime, I will hand over to the panel. We will go in the order of the program, which is also alphabetical. So Piotr, you please start.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks that also the Kanzlei and Bruegel organized this event here in Warsaw. So you're not making it easy because I run here, and speaking first, but still I'm gonna try. So first off is one important point that Russia invasion accelerated a lot of the changes that were happening in the existing model of the world economy. So we kind of saw it before that some supply chain resilience was increasingly more dependent. It gained a lot of importance after the pandemic. The EU faced the challenge and is still facing on reducing this dependency on some of the crucial products that are imported to the EU, especially in the energy sector. We import 83% of our gas supply. Russia has been a source of 45% of that. And of its consumption in 2022, 90% of crude oil was imported, and 74% came from the outside of the OECD. So this was a huge dependency that we're tackling right now, seeing in all of our products because of the inflation rate, which increased in all the European countries. This dependency makes the EU very vulnerable to outside price shocks, and this makes a very good argument on accelerating moving away from fossil fuels whatsoever, including natural gas probably in the long term, as with the EU strategy previously envisioned. But during the inflation crisis, we are also, it's also showing that the ecological dimension, the energy transformation, could be beneficial not only in terms of the environment, but also in terms of the economy and sovereignty in many ways, increasing sovereignty if you have different energy mix in this single moment. So this single exporter of many of the fossil fuels could be exchanged, hopefully, and with a more rapid transition, this could be more diversified, and also we could have a more sustainable kind of energy mix within the EU, but also in some of the countries, as Poland, for example. But knowing that we are going to face a green transition, we have a lot of dependencies there as well. And this is also, the technology is not very well diversified, and probably we all aware of that. So we imported solar panels worth about 8 billion euros. 75% of these imports came from China. And we have we're also a net importer of wind turbines, with China responsible for 85% of these imports. So the growing domestic green energy sector is problematic as well. So we have a different kind of dependency that is being created and will be created if we pursue decreasing dependence from one fossil fuel giant to another, maybe more diversified, but industrial giant as well. And among the 30 resources that the EU has designated as critical in 2020, when the crucial paper was prepared by the European Commission, 19 of them were used in renewable energy production. 11 of these were reliant on import, and over 85% of its demand. This is cobalt, lithium, used in car batteries, motors. Some of them are recovered in Congo, which are owned also by Chinese companies as well. So this is a double kind of issue here. And we also see that several of the European industries are deemed critical because of this reliance, and have to be more resilient. And we have a increased role here to play as the European countries, as the European Commission, in order to decrease, for example, dependence on semiconductors. We try to foster supply coming from the European Union, build new factories. This is not going to happen in in 1 week or 1 month, and we're talking about things and decisions, and many of which were started in 2020, and it's almost 2023, and we still don't have that. So this dependency is quite substantial, and the overriding question is, of the New World Order, what kind of criterion are we going to give to the cooperation that we're going to have? Because we know that some countries we see as threatening, some we don't cooperate with, some we do sanction currently, although some and lots of businesses would like to operate as business as usual, even if the war would end, even companies within the European Union. And this is an important issue, and we see that the Chinese cooperation, the Chinese kind of way of doing business also is changing. This week, Politico published a quite important piece, I guess, that Huawei is giving up on increasing its presence in the European Union. There are lots of people which are fired or changing jobs from the Huawei lobbying business within the European Union. So probably they're going to scale down their business model because lots of companies, especially German companies, do not want to cooperate as well, because prior to the war in Ukraine, prior to the Russian aggression, this was still feasible. Currently, we don't see that. So, in the Chinese kind of model of cooperation also is shifting. And this brings us to the most important question, how are we going to diversify when we're so dependent on one big actor, on so many other actors in the Gulf area, in other economies? Are we going to, for example, forfeit the values that the European Union has? Especially, that's an important question for lots of people when we have the championships in Qatar. I guess probably we're going to cooperate with some people that we just, I wouldn't say like more, but are more acceptable in the current circumstances. And this is where the idea of friendshoring, nearshoring, which is deeply covered by lots of papers, also in debates organized by Bruegel, comes into hand. So are we going to have a world of fragmented globalization? A globalization that basically is stuck at the same level as 2008 and now is going to be fragmented around the world. So we're going to have Southeast Asian economies cooperating more often together, maybe European countries with some of our partners as Turkey more, and the United States with their partners in some other countries. But are we going to have a delimitation of value system? I don't know, for example, that is going to tell us that somebody is acceptable or not. And of course, and this is the looming question, which I have no answer, is what's going to happen when China invades Taiwan? And I basically don't know. And it's just one of the biggest analytical questions that probably any economist has. What's going to happen to the global economy if a similar sanction regime could be imposed on China? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Piotr. Now, André, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here, to be back in Warsaw and in this very beautiful and important location, and for this great event. So I'm going to, although I'm basically a trade person, I'm going to talk a little bit of trade, but I'm going to talk more about the internal market than about external trade. And I will make essentially one point and go through a number of sub-points. The main point is that my sense, when I'm thinking about crisis proofing, I'm looking at what instruments we have at our disposal to do that, to ensure supply reliability and resilience, is that the single market, because of the size of a single market and the diversity of the countries within the single market, I think this is first order. This is what is the most crucial, but I'm going to refer to single market plus. So what I'm going to argue is that indeed a large single market and a private sector operating within the rules of the single market is the key factors to ensure resilience, but that we need to add to the way the single market is operating at the moment, five elements. So that's why I call it single market plus. Now, what are those five elements? The first one is the most trivial one in a sense. is still completing the single market. We had 30 years in 2022. We had 30 years exactly after 92, the year where we declared the single market would be completed. But we all remember that 1992 was the beginning of the completion, was not the end of the completion, was the beginning of it. And we are much further than the beginning, but there are still a number of areas where we don't have a single market. And so still there is regulatory barriers that needs to be removed. Now, this being said, I want also to put in my first point about the single market and removing existing barriers. I must say that having lived through the two recent crises, the COVID crisis and the current crisis, I have been positively surprised of the resilience of the single market. I had expected, first during the COVID crisis, to see much more difficulty for the free movement, not just of goods and services, but in particular of persons, of people, of workers. My expectation had been, and I think proved largely wrong, that because COVID involved spreading from person to person, that this would translate into great difficulty of movement of persons inside the single market. And in particular between the East and the West, since a lot of the movement of labor today, especially short-term labor, is from East to West. That has not happened. And I think that was really, to me, a surprise. There was some teething process, obviously. I mean, we were all taken by surprise by the COVID crisis and the need to organize it. But trucks, yes, there was a bit of problem for trucks and truck drivers very initially, but I think it was very quickly solved. So I mean, we have not seen, and there was obviously the very unpleasant event of the masks inside the EU. I'm not talking of the issue of towards the outside, and we put some export restriction on masks, which makes zero sense. I mean, why do you want to put export restriction on masks? Masks can be produced anywhere, and beyond the panic, the initial panic, masks could be produced everywhere. Any firm, any textile firm can be refurbished to produce textiles, to produce masks. So there was a bit of panic, and there was even barriers to the single market. Countries not allowing masks to be exported to fellow members. But okay, it was really very small. So I think the single market, through this huge shock of the COVID crisis, and today also, we are not seeing much fight about that. And I think this has been this is remarkable. So I think that the single market has been resilient itself and has provided resilience, therefore. But yes, we know that there are still barriers, and that's the first point. As I said, those regulatory barriers that still exist should be removed. Point number two, in my plus, is the level playing field. Yes, we do have a very important regime in the EU, which is about state aid, and that has an important element. It's not just the single market is not just removing barriers. Is also ensuring a level playing field. And to that, the state aid regime is very important. And we know that, we have today, and as we are during the COVID crisis, sort of, in a sense, an emergency regime for state aid. And I think that is indeed needed. But as we know, that does create some problems because different countries have different ability of providing state aid. So even though, you know, we may not breach the state aid regime, it doesn't mean that state aid and subsidies do not provide issues, and that could result in some difficulties of the single market. So, you know, yes, one would like that in principle one has some EU policy. I mean, not just fiscal aid coming from the states, but I think that's why it was so important during the COVID crisis to have the RRF, in a sense that could supplement, that provide the means to countries to have, in a sense, a level playing field. Point number 3, to have a well-functioning single market and resilient is issue of infrastructure. I mean, national markets need to be connected. We still have national markets in some dimensions, whether we are talking about energy, but you know, we could be talking of other areas where really ensuring the flow of all goods and services requires infrastructure at a European level that still does not exist. Okay, one can talk about the pipelines or the gas lines in the current crisis, but there are a number of other elements of infrastructure that are preventing.
Spain, France.
For instance. So those elements of infrastructure, they are really an integral part of a well-functioning single market, of my single market plus. Fourth factor is security. No, security has many dimensions. You already talked about security of supply, and this is where I will talk a little bit about the external dimension. But security has many dimensions, including cybersecurity. No, cybersecurity is an issue in the current situation, but it's an issue. It was an issue 5 years ago already. No, all of our countries. I mean, and this is a public good. Cybersecurity. Sure, private enterprises in the financial sector elsewhere, they have a means of providing their cybersecurity, but ultimately it's the state that needs to provide cybersecurity. And there, I think at the European level, even though we have made progress, there's still a lot of progress to be made in the working of a European cybersecurity space. So that's certainly an element of the resilience of the single market, this cybersecurity. But then there is indeed what you discussed, sort of the security of supply. I would say security of supply, both domestic and the security of supply vis-à-vis some elements that we do need to import. Yes, sure, critical inputs is a matter. To me, obviously, who is a free trader, I still can say that as a non-dirty word, and I know it's becoming more and more of a dirty word, but I'm still a free trader. I still believe that the way to ensure resilience, the trade element and open trade is a crucial element. But at the same time, one cannot be naive. Sure, there needs to be diversification, and sure, in certain critical dimensions, one may or one should have also not only agreements, let's say, with friends, especially in issues that relate to raw materials. You know, we are short of many raw materials in the European Union, so we are not going to have domestic production of some critical raw materials. We just don't have them anywhere in the EU, so we need to ensure a supply. But yes, also we do need some production of certain inputs. Now, whether one wants to talk about chips. I'm not a great fan of some of the policies that are put in place. I think we are we have a problem in the European Union in terms of digital technologies for a long time, and I don't think that there's a quick fix to that. I think the real fix is that we need to have much more technology investment. That's where we are behind. It's not just a question of putting some factories on EU soil with technologies that are developed elsewhere. We need to be on the cutting edge of technology development. So, and this takes time. This takes time, and that's where we need to do the investment, both private and public universities, all of those elements. But security is certainly part of my, it's my fourth point of single market plus. And as I say, security is, for me, open trade is part of the security. So I don't see open trade as a weakness. I see it as a strength for ensuring resilience. But yes, diversification is important. And whether there is a role for government or not in ensuring diversification, I think that needs to be seen. Private firms need to ensure their own diversification. Whether there is, in some dimensions, need for carrots or sticks on the part of government. I think one can see that. I mean, I like, for instance, again, going back to the COVID situation, if you look in the US, I think they have, a very good program that helped them a lot during COVID. Private firms that are producing vaccines have to maintain some spare capacity so as to be able to respond during a crisis to a surge of production of vaccine. No, for that you need to do the innovation, but you need to maintain that spare capacity. No, you can't expect firms to pay for the spare capacity in case of a crisis. Okay, and that needs to be financed by the government. So I think, yes, that is important. Those kind of issues, how to respond to crisis situation and to have the spare capacity. But I think in our case we need to do that. But it's also a question of how you coordinate between countries. So I think there's really a role of governments and a role for coordination at the EU level. And then the final point in my single market plus is a macro point. So single market is a micro, right? One thinks of micro issues, and everything I've been talking about so far is micro. But macro stability, macro financial stability is important. And we saw that, I think that's why also during the COVID crisis, and we have this discussion now also, there's obviously immediately macroeconomic or potentially financial tensions that can arise to any crisis, whatever the origin, whether the origin is a war, whether the origin is a health issue, whatever. It doesn't have to be a financial crisis or a macro crisis to produce macroeconomic instability or financial instability. And that macroeconomic instability or financial instability can be very disruptive to the functioning of the single market. So yes, I think when we think single market, we can't just think of the micro side. We need to think of the macro side and the stability, and then that relates again to, at the EU level, to EU policies of stability. Again, I think that the example of what was done during the COVID crisis with the recovery and resilience facility, which was macro, but it was very much micro. I remember talking to some colleagues from Germany, in fact, and where they felt, and I think rightly so, that there could be disruption to the single market if in some of the southern countries, Spain and Italy in particular, that had been hit very badly by the sovereign debt crisis, and then were at the beginning of the COVID crisis, were again the most hit countries, that problems in those countries, and that were very, very severe on the health side, could produce severe disruptions to the working of the single market. And that therefore one needed also to have, in a sense, macroeconomic stabilization tool. So let me stop here.
Super. Thank you. And now we have Krzysztof Trepczynski, please.
Yes, thank you very much for your kind introduction of my person. I not feel more important than I really are. It's always good to be last speaker because you can somehow use what has been said by the previous speakers, and then I can skip the part on dependencies, which was done very well by Piotr. I cannot mention the question of internal market, which was done by Andrew. In my intervention, I try to answer a question. If the EU can build a resilient economy against current and the future crises in the environment of the open free trade? And the answer is very simple. No, it cannot. Because of the low competitiveness of the most part of the European industry, for many reasons. Declining higher education in Europe. It's enough to mention that in the Shanghai list of the best universities, there are not a single institute in the place in the European Union on the first 15 places. Connected with this declining innovation in the EU, it's enough to mention during the pandemic crisis, not a single vaccine was produced by the company with the headquarters in the European Union. Of course, it's obvious, very high cost of production in the EU, because I will return to this point later on. And last but not least, an unfair practices by many competitors, especially China, but not only. South Korea in shipbuilding industry, Gulf countries in aluminium industry, and so on. Then probably we should start a serious discussion in the European Union about the future macroeconomic policy. We cannot pose unilateral additional costs on our industry, for example, waste directive, CO2 emission, believing at the same time that we can expand our economy, become a champion of the world. I would like to be crystal clear. I'm not against a climate policy, and I don't deny the danger of the climate changes. But everything is interrelated, and it can't be seen separately. And the EU is looking at most of the issue in a separate silos. Here is the trade policy, here is industrial policy, here is climate policy, and so on, and we are losing a horizontal approach to the issues, a horizontal approach to the problems and how it really may be solved. And probably, if you would like to build a new industries, which was mentioned, we should open some umbrella in the European Union. You mentioned Andrew state aid, but maybe these rules are too rigid if you look at the rules applied by many countries around Europe. European Union developed quite well and different instruments combating trade defense instrument against countries abusing their position in international trade, mostly subsidies, but not only, for example, state-owned enterprises and the role of state-owned enterprises and so on. And maybe it's time to think how to use this instrument. Maybe we should use it in a more creative way. I'm not against open trade. I was a permanent representative of Poland to WTO, which is in the heart of the open trade. But we should, at the same time, not be naive. There are countries abusing the system. The OECD produced a set of very well reports on sectoral industries showing the level of subsidies, especially by China, but not only, which are completely escaping the rules. We should think maybe Donald Trump was not entirely wrong in this trade policy. I know it's heresy, but if you are facing a partner who are abusing the system you try to preserve, probably it's time to think how to deal with such a partner. The European Union is very good in drawing of different strategies. Master's plan, program, the last one on semiconductor you mentioned. But master plans, programs, does not help anything. By the way, Swiss government, which is commonly perceived as an official one in doing its economic policy, never adopt any strategy, except one, which completely failed after that. Because at the end, the individual companies take the decision. They decided on the direction of import. They decided where to place their investment, and they can't be ordered by governments or by any structure. If, of course, we are not going to build a central planning economy in the European Union, but I hope it will never be a case. Then if you would like to have a desired behavior of the companies, we should create an environment for these companies to do what we are like to achieve. Otherwise, all these master plans and strategies remain only on papers. They are different instruments. We are discussing now and discussing, for example, carbon border adjustment mechanism, many similar instruments. And maybe it's time really to look at the complexity of the issue. Industry is escaping from the European Union. The companies are seeking investment abroad, new investments. And we are speaking about attracting investment to Europe, about value-added chains and so on. But what does it mean, value-added chain, in real terms? A car is produced by about 3,000 different parts and elements produced in 30 countries. We would like to bring these 3,000 parts to Europe from the 30 countries? Unrealistic. Vaccine against COVID-19. It's several substances produced in different countries. What does it mean to develop the production of a vaccine in Europe? Everything? Not so easy task. The case of Fukushima, the failure of the nuclear power in Japan, show one case. Because of the situation, several factories around were affected. One of them was a producer of very specific element for cars. I think it was fuel pumps. This producer supply fuel pumps practically for all cars assembled around the world. And it was a problem for all the producers at once. But what is happening? Because of the economy in scale, it's cheaper to produce in big lines. We really economically visible to bring all these small producers to the European Union and hope to have a competitive production? I'm seriously doubt. Then we should start from thinking seriously about macroeconomic policy in Europe, which at present, it's my observation, personal, of course, I'm not representing the institution, it's not leading us to a successful aim of building a resilient economy in the EU. Thank you very much.
Okay, fascinating discussion that answered some questions and probably raised more questions than it answered. So what we will do now is I will ask each of the panelists one question, one set of questions, and then I want to give them also a chance to respond to each other, and then we will open it to the floor. So let me go with the original order. So Piotr, your contribution was mostly about the need to diversify essentially trade relations so as to avoid dependency. And then you raised some problems that we may have to solve as a result of that. So I have a couple of questions on this. And the first one is if you maybe could speak on one point that was raised in passing by André, which is that it's not completely clear to me whether and what role there is for state intervention in achieving this diversification. So you could well argue that the problem of energy dependency on Russia was not caused by the private sector, but it was caused by misguided state policies. Had we only left the private sector alone, perhaps it would not have happened in this part. So there is not sort of a completely obvious sense to me that private companies would not on their own have an interest to avoid dependencies. There is an argument for having a state-subsidized excess capacity that I think is clear, but it is not entirely clear to me how far the state really needs to take action to achieve diversification. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question then is, if the state does need to take action, what are the policy instruments, and in particular on the trade side, right? So we do have a multilateral trade regime that probably does not allow us to selectively tax, say, goods that we think are too concentrated, or maybe we should develop that regime. So when you sort of think concretely how we actually would intervene as a state to get a more diversified production structure and avoid dependencies, where would we start? How do we even think about this?
Okay, thank you. That's a very good question, actually, because of course I'm also a free trader. I don't think that it's an obsolete word. The development of Central and Eastern European countries wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for free trade and globalization. That's that's basic point. We wouldn't have such tremendous GDP per capita growth if it wasn't for free trade, the acceptance to the single market, to the European Union, the possibility to export products. Poland is an exporting economy. We're an open exporting economy that wants to trade more with European countries. That's why Poland has been a champion on competitiveness, on level playing field, not so much state aid actually, and decreasing state aid in some of the countries and protectionistic measures within the European Union, which are still there or within the service sector, because that is an important element of growth. And actually, that raises me to the point: is there a lot to do for the state? Actually, not. Because what we see after 2020, with the increased greenfield investments, for example, in Central and Eastern European countries, nearshoring happened without state intervention. Companies just wanted to build resilience, wanted to find partners which are decrease their dependence on the moving of ships around the globe, of the movement of ships around the globe. And that was the most important factor, because if you had a semiconductor fire in Texas, that meant you couldn't produce cars in the European Union, basically. And this is probably one of the things that could be somehow more stimulated by the state, but then and this is what the European Union did, is when you can provide some state aid for specific kind of sectors which seem to be crucial, and European Union won't be cost competitive in those. And I think that actually this is a very short and narrow list that we can create. It's not that we're gonna support any kind of business within the European Union. Actually, I think the European Commission pointed out to the good sectors, the good branches. And of course, the issue is then that you have international companies which are, as everybody, rent-seeking. So Intel is going to create the manufacturing plant. So state support and European taxpayers' money is going to go to an international corporation, which is not European. But we cannot not allow some of the partner countries to take part in that, because we want to have single market. So not too much of the state intervention, but what can the state do is create a climate of more cooperation. It can create political debates, and can create conferences, ways that the businesses mix and do cooperate more and have more of meeting points in order to have to create these opportunities of new products to be produced, or new business operations to be created. And this is, I think, one of the most important elements that the state can drive, and as European countries can do, is to further the cooperation between European countries, European companies within the European countries. And this is somehow not that important role that many politicians do see. So that they have to, if they want to succeed. I would love to see, you know, a plane full of French businesses going to Germany with French politicians. The same way Polish, German, and whatsoever. And this can drive more business opportunities, of course, if they're not seeking rent and state aid that much. So that's one of the points I would like to make. But the big question is what to do with the energy market. Because when we talk about semiconductors or some rare earth metals, they of course are important, but it's not the issue that we're facing right now. Currently, we're not going to import gas and oil from Russia. And European Union, in my opinion, is doing the right decision. I've been an advocate with many people that this is the right decision to make since the beginning of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. But it is creating a lot of calamity in the economy. And of course, as the European Union, we need to, as a stronger voice, also do cooperate and think of measures that are going to decrease this dependence on these crucial elements, as with supply of gas to the European Union, decreasing the price of gas within the European Union, both using market and non-market regulations, because the energy market is basically very regulated within the European Union. It's not a free market there. Never been. This is something I guess that a lot of more attention that the Commission could have to that. So of more cooperation, being stronger, and not leaving that one thing just to the member states.
Thank you. So I do think the attention is now in this area. So the question is whether we get the results quickly enough. But so roughly, you would say actually the market does have a big role. First and foremost, the duty of governments is to avoid big strategic mistakes, like was the case in Germany. And then some sort of gentle industrial policy that essentially fosters capacity in areas to make us less dependent, roughly like that, right?
Yeah.
Right. Great. Maybe then turning to André. So, you know, the way I would sort of summarize what you said is that actually your internal market plus, you know, there's part of your plus that is still about building an internal market. There were several of that. And then if you then have the real plus to the better internal market, there are essentially some dimensions that are important for resilience that are, if you like, orthogonal to the internal market. So this is about macro stability, and it's about energy security from the outside, right? So this is clearly very important. And then there is one area where I think it's more complicated, which has to do with state aid at the level playing field. And so here, and possibly also in the area of macro stability, I'm wondering whether there is a trade-off, if you like, between an ex-ante and an exposed perspective to resilience. So the easiest way of making that case is in the area of macro buffers. So in your fifth point, clearly building macroeconomic buffers is a very important part of resilience, because you want to be prepared for the macroeconomic and financial consequences of a shock. That requires some ex-ante restrictions on what countries can do. But then perhaps in the actual crisis, these restrictions turn out to be counterproductive, right? So an argument from Poland that we actually heard this morning is that you know, while Poland is a very stability-oriented and fiscally conservative country, it would like to see a looser or special treatment of defense expenditures, for example, and presumably, particularly in the case of a shock, right, when you need to mobilize. So there's a tension there. I wonder how you address this tension, and I also wonder if you could clarify a bit what you were saying on the state aid regime, right? So if the level playing field is your main plus, you would want actually quite a strict state aid regime, possibly supplanted by fiscal instruments, which you briefly mentioned. On the other hand, again, you know, after the fact, you want more flexibility on state aid, and you sort of also seem to suggest that actually having emergency rules is important. But once we have these emergency rules that allow more flexibility, then I think that even from an ex-post perspective, there could be a problem because in the absence of a fiscal level playing field, some countries will be able to use these emergency rules much more than others, and then we end up in a huge squabble, which then completely destroys unity and undermines resilience. So basically, I'm really confused, if you didn't notice it, on the role of flexibility of internal rules for resilience. Are they good or are they bad?
I think that's a very good. It's a very good question. I mean, it's a difficult question, a very good one. No, I would say, in the spirit of you know, two objectives, two instruments. No. Here, I think, and the kind of union that we have, okay, we are not the United States of Europe. Right? We are a collection of states. That is, most of the money is at the state level. There is, however, the issue of the money at the EU level. So I think this is where the two instruments come. There is the state, the member states, and there is the EU. And I think that's where, it seems to me, we as the EU found a good approach in the COVID crisis. So, I mean, what I would like to see in normal times, yes, I would like fairly strict rules, fiscal rules, state aid rules, all of those spending rules, strict ruls. No, then comes the issue, that's the normal time. No, then comes the crisis. Now, in a sense, if we go back to the COVID crisis, the first step was, as I said sometime, is to give a license to countries to do whatever it takes. You can do. The ECB, for the countries that are in the euro area, the ECB will intervene, will purchase government bonds, fiscal rules are suspended, and state aid rules are not suspended, but they are given much more flexibility. So you can do what you want. Okay? So in principle, we were not, but we should have been strict before, then member states would have the room for maneuver to intervene. But the problem in a crisis like COVID is that it's not one country that was hit. It's not like you needed space and you do. Everybody needed space and everybody intervenes. And then, nonetheless, because of the past, the different capacity was there. So then in the second phase, we had the European plan. And that's what the European plan was needed, because otherwise it would have been a huge acrimonious discussion. The countries with the space, Germany, to name countries here, Germany versus Italy, France, Spain, right? And that would have been awful. And I think that's why, in my reading of history, that's why Germany, during the COVID crisis, changed its role compared to the sovereign debt crisis. There, Germany was aligned with the hardliners, Netherlands and Finland. Okay? And in the COVID crisis, it was not. Sort of Germany switched side. But my reading is that Germany switched side for internal market reasons. I think it understood at that time that given the global environment, remember we were still in the Trump presidency, Trump was menacing to have measures against the imports of cars. After having put in place the measures on steel, he had a report done by the Department of Commerce saying that yes, you know, one should be authorized in the United States to put the same kind of tariff measures on cars than on steel, but he did not do it. But he menaced all the time the Europeans, which means essentially menaced Germany, because most of the export of cars from Europe to the US are German cars. And I think Germany understood at that time that given what's happening in China, what's happening in the US, what's happening with globalization, the internal market that at some stage was seen as not so important, right? I mean, there was a view during the financial crisis that, after all, growth in Europe is not going to sustain the German industry. What will sustain German industry's global exports, because much of the growth is coming from outside of Europe, and that's true. But in an environment which is more difficult from a geopolitical viewpoint, then the internal market becomes more important also in relative terms. And I think that's what Germany, rightly, in my view, understood. So we supplemented the member states tool with the EU tool, and that's why you needed here. You have two objectives. Well, you needed those two instruments.
Should this happen now as well?
I'm sorry?
Should the same happen now? So do we need some sort of common financial response for internal market reasons? I mean, at least one person on this panel, sitting where I sit, has argued that, but I wonder whether you agree or not.
So I've been hesitant about that. Do we need the same kind of instrument than the instrument we needed, the RRF, which is very redistributive? Okay? Do we need this kind of redistribution at the moment? I don't think so. So if we need a redistribution, certainly not to the south. Now, there is probably an element potentially of redistribution to the east. And so the issue of migration in this country and the discussion that we had this morning with the minister, I think resonated with me very much. I think there we should have more solidarity on this issue. Now, I don't think the amounts, we are not talking of hundreds of billions. We are talking of maybe tens at the most of billions. So it seems to me that there are the resources into the EU budget. So I don't think that we need an additional resources, but the EU budget, there is some flexibility, and there can be a bit more flexibility in the EU budget. So the EU budget should be used for that purpose.
Right. So I mean, I think just to sort of make it clear what is behind this. So I think there are two arguments for having some scaling up of common fiscal responsibility. One is burden sharing with respect to migration and defense, which would go in the direction of helping the East. But the one that I have argued for with my energy policy colleague Sitz Bruegel is a different argument. It's sort of very narrowly targeted to the single market. And the idea here is that if we are going to achieve the survival of energy-intensive industry in Europe through subsidies, through state support, then of course there's a big risk that only firms in the fiscally rich countries are going to make it and not others. And so that sort of level playing field argument would justify, I think, a very targeted form of a common fiscal or financial instrument. Piotr, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a short thing I want to say is there is also a geopolitical kind of argument, not talking about the energy policy, but support to Ukraine. And it's also tens of billions of euros. And from the more global perspective, the American administration thinks, especially the Republican part of the Congress right now, thinks that Europe is not doing enough in terms of helping Ukraine, and a lot of this of a common debt, these debates of a common debt for the support of Ukraine, in order to support the country itself. I'm not saying even munition and warfare, but to support the state, which has a lot of financial needs. That is an argument I actually think is a good one.
Yeah, I fully agree, and we have also made this point. Christoph?
Just short intervention. I think that Piotr somehow answered this question in answering the first question you posed to him. Of course, we are not in a position for different reasons to protect all the sector of the industry. But as he mentioned, we should concentrate on few sectors, advanced sectors, when we have a cooperative advantage, and try to somehow create a favorable condition for this particular sector to develop. It for sure will not be a heavy chemical industry. This game is lost. Probably steel industry is lost. Shipbuilding industry practically lost, maybe some niche products. But they are advanced technology sector when we still can deliver as the Europe. It's not semiconductors. This train already left. unfortunately. Even China, spending billions of dollars, failed to catch up in this sector. But there are artificial intelligence on few sectors we can main easily when the Europe should be much more active. Thank you. Sorry?
The health sector.
Health sector, yes.
Right.
Some green technology model. We can name few sectors.
Which actually brings me to the question, or actually one of two questions I was going to ask you. So the first question would have been to elaborate what you meant at the very end when you said that trade policy is not going to solve the problem because of the trade-off essentially between efficiency and resilience. We cannot be completely autonomous, so we need macroeconomic policy. So I wanted you to just say what you meant by macroeconomic. Was it this, or do you mean industrial policy of some form? And then I have a question actually on the trade policy. So if we think that the lack of a global playing field, level playing field is the first order problem, subsidies and so forth, is there anything we can do through reform? And this is, particularly a question in your former capacity as a perm rep to the WTO. Can we do something through reform of the WTO subsidies regime, by making that, more flexible in some respects and perhaps stricter in others? I'm not sure. Or is the only response the use of EU trade policy tools? And if that's the main response, then how to make sure that it does not get abused by special interests? So how do we, distinguish genuine resilience concerns from just a general demand for protection?
It's a very interesting question, which I think is on the permanent discussion in the Brussels and in Geneva as well. We have now two-track system. There are so-called like-minded countries, the EU, US, and many others, which are trying to play accordance with the rules. They're notifying the subsidies, they are avoid unjustified subsidies and so on. And here the level playing field is something which proved to be working, and there is no any need for special arrangement among this group of the countries. Of course, there are individual cases. You mentioned IRA in the US. Unfortunately, this way of thinking, American first, is still present in every US administration, but it doesn't mean that we should start a war with the USA. I understand that the Commission is a process of dialogue. I understand that there are some concrete proposals to solve this question. Then if you have a partner who tries to negotiate with you seriously, it's easier to find a solution without a global conflict. But there is a second track, and of course everyone thinks about China. It is not the China. At the last OECD Trade Committee in October, there was discussion on this subject in the Chatham House format. And there was voices that, of course, but we are speaking about abuse, we are always thinking China, but it's not only China. It's true, it's not only China. But if we look at the scale of the problem, it's always China. Yes. There are few countries, others, in few sectors, but the real problem is China. There are other Asian countries, but then it needs a solution. Of course, negotiation on level playing field are going on, but we should not be naive. It's not the case of 1 year, 2 years. China is very active in this negotiation, not to find a solution, but to hamper the process of the negotiation and avoid a solution. Then probably we, among the like-minded countries, try to find an instrument which can help to deal with China as a source of the problem. It is a question, of course, if this eventual solution will be entirely within the system or a little skip from the system. Probably we'll shoot a little skip from the system. But if it will be instrument applied by many countries, I think it is reasonable to think that such an instrument can survive. It's why I return to my speech. I don't want to say that we should avoid a free trade policy entirely with the outside world. No, we should rethink the free trade policy with the second track of the countries. It's a problem. If I don't know, Japan is supplying goods to Europe because of better competitiveness, it's a real life, it's economy. But the level playing field is there and the conditions are there. But if China is supplying something, and we see the solar panels, for example, in many important fragments of the market, when the competition is abused, about 50% of the prices sometimes are subsidized.
But maybe just for our listeners who are not completely sure about this, WTO rules would in fact allow trade policy instruments to be used in a defensive way against this type of subsidy, right?
You know, when they were adopted, it was different reality. China was not there. They are, let's say, a club of gentlemen trying to find a solution to individual separate problems. And at that time, it was a very efficient instrument. Now we face different reality. We have a partner who are entirely abusing a system, not by the accident. It's a part of their policy. And the system worked and adopted at the time does not cover many instruments used by China. For example, a staying credit below the market condition and so on. There are a lot of instruments now used by China which escape from the definition of the system. Then firstly, we should change the system, even start from the very simple step to force countries to notify the subsidies, which is never done by China, as a first step to see the scale. Of course, thanks to OECD.
I was referring to anti-dumping and countervailing duties regime of the WTO. So in principle, WTO members can impose countervailing duties on subsidized.
Yes, but it's costly, difficult process. You have proof the harm to the industry, and so of course it's possible. It's possible, but it's also required political decision, and a very big question mark is Europe ready now for such a political decision? We still see China as a competitor, but we still see China a potential big market for us. Which concept of China will prevail, I don't know. We thought the same about Russia, how it's finished, we see now. Piotr said about Taipei and what the China will do with Taipei. It's first on the top of the list priority of the Chinese government in a foreign policy, to annex Taipei. Do we believe that it will be forgotten? I don't think so. We should be prepared for any scenario.
We should open to the floor. Finally, you have been extremely patient. Do we get questions? And if you want to speak, please introduce yourself. Please, the gentleman in the middle of the room here. And wait for the microphone. Introduce yourself, and then. Right. And by the way, the code on Slido is #resilience. Right. Okay, thank you very much. Yes?
I would like to ask about how you assess the Eurozone performance, taking into account very homogeneous inflation.
Okay, what we're going to do is collect a few, and then we can, you can essentially pick and choose which ones you want to ask. Mateusz, did you want to, can we have the microphone here to the front, please?
One comment on what the government can...
So you are Mateusz Szczurek.
Mateusz Szczurek, EBRD, European Fiscal Board, and
Right.
Warsaw University. On one comment on what the government can do to support French shoring, and should it do anything. There's a brilliant, very thick on micro paper by Grossman and Helpman, a recent one, which is very sophisticated. And the bottom line is that does it pay for the government to support nearshoring effectively? And the answer is no idea. It depends on the demand structure, and it's a very sophisticated way of saying that, well, it depends. So perhaps ensuring the level playing field, that enforcing the carbon adjustment mechanism and so forth is the right way to do. And the question on something that you alluded to about excluding defense spending from fiscal rules, because to me it sounds crazy. I mean, the crises that we are facing require proofing and costs of that proofing. So that it may be that we should be spending more on defense as a way to proof against defense crisis. But that's an additional cost, additional restriction to our fiscal policy, something that does not resolve the problem of fiscal sustainability, which is dealt with normal fiscal rules. But maybe I'm, you have different views.
No,
I wonder what's, because no one alluded to that. Yeah.
I agree. With the caveat is that if you're going to essentially phase in a new regime that then imposes a very strong restriction, you may want to do it in a way that acknowledges these burdens. So there may be a sort of a smoothing problem, right? You cannot immediately scale down social investment, things like that. But in principle, of course, I'm of the same view. Is there another comment or question? Yes, please. We have two more, and then I will give one or two from the please, the lady in the green jacket.
Żaneta Della, Polish MFA. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess that none of the panelists have mentioned the global gateway. And my question is, how can the global gateway improve the resilience of the EU internal markets? Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. One more here, and then it's coming.
Grzegorz Pytel, Sobieski Institute, or Instytut Sobieskiego. My question relates to autarkic model of economy, and I think Europe never defined itself how it views towards self-sufficiency, self-reliance on its own resources. And let's just briefly have a look at a country like Norway, which has got excellent trade, excellent income, but if you close that country completely, it can survive. It's got no problem to basically keep going on with sustainable, maybe low level, but still economic activities. And my point is Europe, as big as it is, all the countries, never actually defined how Europe can sustain itself if nothing around Europe existed. And I think that's actually, well, I'm not presenting an answer to this question, but I'm surprised that there was never any answer proposed to that question.
Okay, I hope the Norwegians agree with you that they can survive in a close...
Sorry, this is what I've heard from Norwegians.
Yes, okay,
That's how they
good.
to me.
Okay, no, it's a good point. So basically resilience as catastrophic insurance rather than, right, in that sense. And I have one question here, which refers to something I think was mentioned before, a very simple one. Is the CHIPS Act, and by that is meant I think the European CHIPS Act, a crisis-proofing instrument? Is it well designed? So let's hand it back, please. Who wants to go first? Maybe in the order that we had, Piotr?
Alphabetical. Okay, so I'm gonna pick and choose, and the first one from Conrad on nearshoring. So we publish a lot of papers on this issue, and of course there's if you compare the balances of FDIs to developed economies and to the developing economies, you're going to see that the last 2 years is basically the developing economies have more FDIs, and this is a change of trend in terms of whatever it was before. And a lot of traction in terms of greenfield investment up to the first quarter of this year was in Central and Eastern Europe. So the numbers actually quite a lot increased. And as you said, it's not, you know, jaw-opening kind of investments that you're going to see, but these are sometimes medium-sized enterprises which are being part of a supply chain of diversification of some other corporations within, is it Germany, France, sometimes it's even Israel, so kinds of looking somebody who's could produce something that is usable, or sometimes parts of the supply. So it's kind of that they have production from China or from some other Southeast Asian country, and parts of it being produced in Poland or in other Central European countries. So there's not, you know, something very rapid that is happening. Maybe there were some people that were facing that we're going to close down the industrial production in China and just, you know, take the concrete walls and put them in someplace else. Nobody expected that, and it's not going to happen. Maybe some of the businesses are just going to decide to close off in the, you know, next reviews of the profitability of some of the plants that they have in China. And this is sometimes it's also caused by policy, as with Foxconn and the US. The Biden administration is very much in line with the Trumpian kind of way of trade policy. So this could also cause a lot of disruption for the Chinese economy. And yeah, and I pretty much agree with Mateusz here. So it's there's no good answer on how to foster nearshoring or trendshoring or friendshoring or whatsoever. You can create a climate, you can create a way of cooperation, but do you have any specific kind of policies? You never know. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not. It's like with free trade. Free trade surpasses any kind of agreements between countries. Countries start to trade with each other, then they have agreements. We sometimes forget that within the European Union, having agreements with some countries or regions and think that, oh, it's going to increase the trade so much. No, it's not. Doesn't happen like that.
Okay.
I'll take 2 points. One is also on nearshoring and the other one on the global gateway. On nearshoring or friendshoring, I'm about to start actually a study, but very detailed at the firm level, using data from Belgium, because Belgium the Central Bank of Belgium, lots of researchers are using. I did that for something before, but many researchers, including American researchers, come to use Belgian data because Belgium provides this firm level both for trade and for investment. But okay, Belgium is a small country. That's the disadvantage. But you can get a lot of stuff. And what I'm trying to get at is, you know, first, what kind of nearshoring has there been? So do you see in the pattern of trade, both import and export, in value chains, do you see some changes in the pattern in terms of the partners? So that's number one. And I mean, now then the question is, and that would be for some bigger countries, by the way, than maybe for Belgium, what one would like to see is whether, assuming that there is some nearshoring, is it at the expense of countries outside of the EU, also at the expense of countries inside the EU? So I have a bit of a worry. It's only a hypothesis, and not easy hypothesis to test with the data, that the whole discourse on nearshoring, friendshoring / nearshoring, that seems to be against outside of the EU very quickly turns into something inside the EU. And in particular, from the east of Europe to the west of Europe. I'm not going to give you any countries that may be involved in such activities, but I can think of some. And and I've already sort of tested a little bit that. So, but I think we really lack, and this needs to be done at the firm level, at the sectoral level even. It's not sufficient. Does one see something? And then the second one is, if you do see something, why is it you see it? Is it simply indeed that firms, because of COVID and now because of the war, they've simply re-optimized? Okay, well, we live in a new world. What I was doing before in this rather benign world, I can't do anymore. I have to diversify, and maybe diversify, including inside the EU. I have to be worried that something could happen. Either our government or their government will cut supply. So, you know, okay, that would be a normal. Or is it something else? Are firms acting on instructions in some manner, or incentive rather from government? So I think the truth of the matter is that at the moment, in a serious manner, we don't have the data. How much is it anecdotal, that there is a bit of nearshoring, and you know, so that's what we had heard. Okay, some firms are changing their pattern of investment of sourcing, and because you know they woke up one morning and say, oh, "Gosh, new world," or there's very little, and when there is, it's really the result of government policy.
Global Gateway?
So Global Gateway, I think, my sense in relation to what I said before, it relates to, and understandably so, ultimately to sourcing of raw materials. So I think there, I mean, I think it's a very interesting issue, and anchoring back to the past. We have been there before, the world has been there before, sourcing of raw materials and fight between countries about sourcing raw materials. So, I mean, in a sense, we lived in a happy world in the past few decades, where there was sourcing of raw materials, but it was not done in a geopolitical, it was more in an economic environment. Geopolitics was always there, obviously, especially with oil, but now it has taken a much bigger dimension. And so I think the Global Gateway relates to that, in particular with Africa, and EU competition with China, and you know, the feeling that now we are lagging quite behind China in relation with some of the African countries, and that is a problem, in particular for sourcing of raw materials. So I think the EU now sees also part of the FTAs, the free trade agreements, although they are not specifically aimed at raw materials, but the view is that free trade agreements are agreements with friends. In a sense, when you are a friend with a country and you are demonstrating your friendship because you have a free trade agreement, you can hope also that those countries are not going to cut supply of raw materials from you. Not just because it says so on paper, but because you have created an environment of friendship, a climate that would, sort of an insurance policy. And I think this is a reality of the world, and I think Global Gateway participates to that.
With, of course, the limitation that, as we have seen, economic integration does not automatically prevent crazy things from happening. Christoph, you have the last word.
Two short points. Firstly, resilience, how delicate the issue is. I give you one example. At the beginning of pandemic, one of the European Union government, it was not Poland, by the way, but I don't want to mention which country, get panic because of the rapid spread of disease and the lack of respirators, which was practically a precious item to buy and not possible to buy at the beginning of pandemic, suggested to its cars producer to switch their production and to start to produce respirators, which are badly needed. And one of the car producers took seriously this suggestion and opened the production, switched part of his line and opened the production of the respirators. And what happened at the end? The government found a cheaper supplier abroad and bought it from abroad. It's why I think we should understand that question of resilience have different angles, and the cost is also one element of it. And one point outside the question, but probably it's my last intervention. We skip one very important point in our discussion because we concentrated on industry, internal market, and so on. But there is also a question of food security. It was never a problem in Europe before 24th of February. We in Europe thought that it's a problem somewhere in Africa. We can supply foods, food security aid, and so on and so on. Now we see that the food become also a global problem. And if, of course, does not mean that Europe will not have another, European citizens will have not access to food, but food insecurity provoke a different kind of problems which also affect Europe indirectly. And this is, we should also remember when we are speaking about the structure of the world economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure your question about the Norway analogy was answered, but I think it's a good way of thinking about it, right? That you want to think of, particularly when you evaluate trade-offs between resilience, growth, efficiency, and something, one good way of thinking about it is that you want to have, in a sense, a minimum plan, right? A backup plan in case everything goes wrong, right? And that maybe allows you to focus just on a few key issues, and then you can be more relaxed about integration on everything else. So actually, I like that idea, and we'll talk to the Norwegians about it. So thank you also very much. Sorry, Piotr, one point.
I just wanted a short information on what Andres said. So I didn't know I won't have a chance to talk about it. You know, friendshoring, offshoring, this is all new language and buzzwords, but the reindustrialization, Industry 4.0. We debated on industrialization within the European Union for a long period of time. Businesses wanted to do that, and for sure, with cheaper automatization, with more advanced robots, it's going to be easier to do, and this is to be expected. So there are probably going to be two processes that we're actually seeing right now. Some of the businesses that are moving around towards some parts of the European Union, also coming back to the headquarters, closer to the market, and some looking for a different country, also within the single market, but not thinking of Turkey or China, also due to energy policy reasons and climate policy reasons, which is something which we didn't talk about, but it's going to be there in 6-7 years, and this is going to be a deeply debated issue in terms of how we're going to have trade in the global world when we have actually some sanctions for countries that don't have a good energy mix in how we define good.
Yes, I hope you can disentangle these things in your paper, Andre, between pandemic versus technology, essentially, right? Thank you all very much. We are way over time. Sorry for being a bad chair, but thank you all for being patient, and thank you to the panel. It's been great. Bye-bye.